Morning or good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the third day. I'm going to wait a little bit to give people the opportunity to log on. Those of you in Canada, thank you so much for joining so early in the morning. And for those of you further east of us, I hope you had a wonderful day so far. We're looking forward to this third and final day of the conference. Just going to give people a little bit more time to log on. Make sure that those that want to participate are there. Right. So let's start. Good morning, good afternoon once again, everyone. Welcome to the third and final day of the conference. I hope you enjoyed the first 2 days. We have a great last day ahead of us, starting with a keynote speech, followed by 2 panel discussions. And I'm going to jump right in. It's my pleasure to introduce the keynote speaker of today to you, Dr. Deepa Joshi. She is the Gender and Social Inclusion Lead at the International Water Management Institute, IMI, and she's based in Colombo, Sri Lanka. She's a feminist political ecologist by training. Her work analyzes shifts in environmental policies and how these restructure contextually complex intersections of gender, poverty, class, ethnicity, and identity. Dr. Joshi has worked in South Asia as well in Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Latin America. Her published findings present ethnographic analyses of how the complexity of inequity is reiterated across institutions in the rules and processes of policy making and policies. Dr. Joshi's interests lie in translating research outputs into capacity building initiatives for policy impact. And she's been leading these activities on several bilateral projects in South and Southeast Asia and Africa. In her talk today, Dr. Joshi will focus on the relationships between gender, water, and social inclusion. And as in the previous days, if you have any questions for Dr. Joshi, please enter them in the Q&A box. You can do that during her talk or after her presentation, and then I'll help her to get to your questions after she finishes. Dr. Joshi, we're very honored to have you here with us this morning. I'm happy to hand over the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Professor Brouwer. I am honored and delighted to be here today. Thank you for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to share some of my work and research findings on water and gender, and I would add also social inclusion. And as is the title of my presentation, the argument that I wish to make today here is that there is a long way to go. And I hope this is also inspiration to the young researchers joining us in this session as to the amount of work that needs to be done, but also the urgency with which water, gender, and social inclusion really need to be brought together. So I am going to be talking about a couple of things. I want to first of all provide a little bit of a historical overview of the water sector or the water sectors and try and overlap that with how gender has been thought about in international development. And then I want to come to discuss what I and several others call are prominent and glaring blind spots in relation to water in international development, and also in relation to gender in water. Then, using a case study research of a project that we did in Egypt, I want to discuss the fact that the way what gender is understood and addressed in the water sector, in water projects, is rather depoliticized. And this is a feminist term, depoliticization. It really means stripping away, the systemic structural objective of inequality and reducing it to sort of really providing a much more apolitical understanding of women and water. And then I would invite you all. I just want to say that I think I've had a power outage, so let me just move over to a new connection.
So we knew that this might happen. Ah, there you are.
But you don't see my screen, right? I need to share that again.
Yes,
okay.
please. Thank you.
We had discussed that this was going to happen, and it did. So I'm in Sri Lanka, and we are going through an economic crisis and a fuel crisis. So this is a common story here. Do you see my screen again?
Yes, we do.
Yes.
And you hear me as well, right?
Yes.
That's great. I hope it remains like this and that there are no further changes. So at the very end of my presentation, I would really like to invite you all to a special issue that we are bringing together on ways to reimagine gender in relation to water. So the first thing to really understand is that water, there's been an interest and commitment on water in international development policy ever since, the start of international development. Goes right to the 1960s. And in the 1970s, there were a number of international events related to water, of which the Mar del Plata UN Conference on Water, was very instrumental, and the first intergovernmental conference devoted exclusively to water. And that led to several other things like the UN International Decade for Drinking Water Supply and Sanitation in the 1980s, then the World Water Forums, the introduction and acknowledgement of water in the Millennium Development Goals, and subsequently in the Sustainable Development Goals. An acknowledgement, I think this is really key, of water as a basic human right, water and sanitation in 2010. And then also a little more recently, the understanding that the climate change crisis is essentially a water crisis, and the introduction of the discussion on water on climate, which seems very obvious, but it had not happened earlier. And now, we are yet in another decade for action, the decade for water for sustainable development, which goes up to 2028. So the point that I want to make here is that, definitely there's been a lot of interest and commitment to addressing water problems. But the point is, how much progress have we made? Where are we now? Those are things that I think are worth looking at and considering, which is also something that I want to discuss. And sort of overlapping with this focus on water was also the focus on gender in relation to development. The 1970s were the UN Decade for Women, and even in the 1980s UN Decade for Water, there was a significant focus on women. The 1995 Beijing Conference on Women, all of these events have stressed that water matters significantly to women. Although I think the understanding here in these declarations is that we are mostly talking about water supply and domestic water use, which is essentially women's responsibility. And in line with these developments, if you also look at how the nature of the gender narrative has changed over the years. You know, in the 1970s, even though there was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 with, you know, very specific recognition of women's rights, women were generally and largely still seen as wives and mothers. You know, and the focus was very much on sort of welfare interventions for women. In the 1970s, a lot of feminist researchers from around the world, you know, emphasized that women had a specific role in relation to development. And in the 1980s, you know, you had an even more emphasis on identifying the fact that gender was not just about women. It was really about addressing deep-rooted social, economic, and political disparities in, you know, that were very key and instrumental to making women unequal. So the focus was not so much on women as an entity and focusing on women, but really about identifying, you know, how do these deep-rooted social, economic, and political disparities, you know, how they hold back women. And it was about addressing these disparities rather than focusing on women per se and adding women as entities in development programs and agendas. And in the 2022, in the CGIAR, as well as with other key donors, you know, we are again talking very much from a gender and development lens. We are talking about gender transformative approaches, and we are talking about reversing the status quo of the inequalities. And we are talking about looking at institutions and really about changing, you know, the structure and culture of institutions, including at policy and decision-making levels. So one thing is that how well has this focus on gender overlapped with the focus on water in international development? And if you listen to some of what you know, recent sort of statements on water, it seems we haven't done so well. It seems that there are definite blind spots in relation both to water, but especially in relation to gender in water. There was an interesting article by UNESCO in 2022, which said that gender equality still remains out of reach in the water domain. And, you know, the fact that even today, this iconic image of women carrying water in the scorching sun, you know, is really an image of the several flaws in development, of ambitions, goals, objectives not being met. And it's sort of surprising as well that water, the resource for which there was so much international and national commitment and you know, concern, despite an investment, despite all of that, 2.1 billion people still live without basic access to safe water. And COVID-19 was very, very instrumental in identifying the water and sanitation bias. It was identified that 3 out of 10 people globally could not wash their hands with soap and water. And to date, in 80% of the households which lack access to on-premise water or water in the household, women miss out on economic and educational opportunities, and that women's bodies are still really functioning as part of the water delivery infrastructure, doing the work of pipes. Something that we don't talk about so much, which is really important and relevant, is the fact that women are highly underrepresented in water institutions, whether they be in the global north or the global south. And even when women are represented, it's really not in a technical or a managerial positions. And finally, although there is agreement globally, increasingly, that the climate crisis is essentially a water crisis, there is no clarity on how gender is to be addressed in relation to the climate crisis. We still, talk about water mostly in relation to domestic water supply and occasionally in relation to irrigation. So, it's quite remarkable that the focus on women and the focus on water, which were two key international priorities, has not really resulted in, addressing some of the most basic problems, whether it be access to water or whether it be some clear strategies on how to address gender inequality in complex, complicated, increasingly interconnected water challenges. So coming down to how have we got it so wrong? Why are we lagging behind so much in relation first to water? I think when you look at the literature, the writing on the wall is very, very clear that, we globally, whether, international, whether it be international actors or whether it be national governments, there is simply not enough investment on water. And if you look at the aggregate figures of what would be needed to deliver water, these are significant, 150 billion, which, is sort of, I think, a little bit stark and not necessarily conducive to the current economic crisis and the economic situation globally. But when you break it down to what would it translate to in terms of the global GDP or national GDPs, these are not significant. So it seems that it is possible to secure water if, if just 1% of the global GDP, which amounts to 29 cents per day per person, would be invested. And that, it's really remarkable that 75 countries can achieve sustainable water management at 2% or less of their annual GDPs. And yet, despite the statistics and the figure that the gains from investing in water are so, remarkably proportionate, worthy of the investment, which would completely change the scenario in the global economic, statistics. Yet 80% of countries tend to underinvest in water, and the OECD claims that this investment, the not investing, underinvesting is going to continue. So I think that fundamentally is a key problem. So I think the focus there, I'm sharing this slide and this information because what I want to emphasize is that the gender and water problem is not so much a problem of community and women and community management, etc. It's really a problem of economics at a very global scale and level. And I think that sometimes we tend to overlook that when we're talking about gender and water and emphasizing and advocating for change, especially from a gender perspective. I think this also sort of really emphasizes, how women, the burden on women, the time burden, the labor burden in women is seen and valued economically. This is a clear example of the devaluation of women's work, women's labor, women's bodies. I talked about management of water supply systems not being a key problem, but actually I'm sort of wrong in saying that it is really a key problem. It has been identified that after the issue of investment, the big other challenge is the maintenance after construction. And what has happened typically in water supply schemes or irrigation schemes is that there has been a tendency to create infrastructure and then to rely on communities or community-based management for the longer term upkeep and functionality of these systems. And that was even seen as empowering to the communities, giving them space and engaging them in water resources management. But there are increasing studies which show that actually that's not entirely a correct argument. The fact is that communities, mostly poor communities who lack water resources, really lack the capacity, including financial resources, to manage water infrastructure post-completion of the projects. But also another really important thing that feminist researchers have pointed out is that there isn't a homogeneous community, there isn't an egalitarian community, that communities are really spaces of unequal power relations, practices, and values, and transferring the role of managing water to these community-based institutions puts a lot at risk, especially for poor, marginalized communities and for women. And also the fact that this tendency now, and it's not just now, it started from the 1980s, that engaging women in water projects, seeing that as a way of almost empowering women, has been critiqued by gender researchers by saying that without really looking at how these water projects benefit women, what spaces exist for women, and whether women's other roles and responsibilities, other gendered roles, responsibilities are also changing or not, in the absence of looking at these issues, just emphasizing women to be engaged in water management and community management of water resources often reiterates women's marginality and vulnerability. So I think it would not at all be incorrect to say that despite all the research that has been done, the gender agenda in relation to water is problematically stuck in the 1970s women and in development discourse, which tends to see the sheer engagement of women as being empowering, or as being the way to women's increased roles and capacities and increased opportunities. And this approach is really, and if you type in gender and water, if you Google gender and water, then immediately you'll get pictures, images of women and water, and you get all these talks about the women and water. So fundamentally, what the water sector has failed to do is really question the fact that why is it that women are burdened with water roles and responsibilities, and why has that persisted, even though the challenge to fetch water becomes incredibly difficult, and the story of women traveling miles and miles to fetch water seems to be a persisting story. So somehow we have really failed to trigger or disrupt or challenge this unequal burdening of women with difficult water roles and responsibilities. And again, as I said, that even though climate is really causing very different types of water crises, we still tend to talk about gender only mostly in relation to domestic water supply. And we only talk about women occasionally in relation to irrigation and irrigation water management. But we fail, even in relation to irrigation, fundamentally, we fail to consider the fact that, women generally do not own land, largely do not own land. And so their role in irrigation is not very strategic to their empowerment. The other thing that is, a key gap and challenge in when we talk about, or when we in water gender or discourses, is the fact that we tend to homogenize women just as we homogenize communities. We fail to recognize that actually women are not an entity, that they are cross-cutting contextual inequalities, be it ethnicity, for example, in North America, race, caste and class, in the part of the world where I am, age, disability, etc. We have really not been able to take into account these different disparities. And persistently, despite the fact that we recognize that there's an underrepresentation, a serious underrepresentation of women in water institutions, and that the masculinity in water institutions and in water decision making is so very prominent, we still only tend to focus on addressing problems, water women problems at the household and the community levels. So, the approach that we have adopted in looking at women and water, which is problematically stuck in the old archaic 1970s discourse, does not allow us to really look at gender power disparities, the structural systemic disparities that exist. And I would like to just take you to a research that we recently did in Egypt to sort of bring to your understanding that, how can we look at these issues beyond women, and how a feminist political economy, ecology approach really allows us to broaden our perspective in understanding gender water disparities. So globally, there are reports of male-out migration from agriculture and a feminization of agriculture, which means more and more women being left behind to do agriculture work. I mean, women were historically doing agriculture work, but they've also taken on new responsibilities, complete responsibilities at the household level because of increasing migration that's happening globally around the world due to different factors, including but particularly climate. The fact is that in many contexts, this increased engagement of women in agriculture, especially in irrigation, is sometimes seen as perhaps positive. And this sort of narrative is easy to sort of believe and assume when you are talking about, let's say, women in the Middle East, in many parts of South Asia, where social cultural restrictions on women's mobility kept them at home. So the fact that they're leaving their homes and working in the fields and coming out is seen as a very positive change. Our research really questions some of these issues, because I think fundamentally, whether it is in the Middle East or in South Asia, as I said earlier, that yes, indeed, women are increasingly more engaged in agriculture, but the fact is that the structural issues of access to land has not changed historically, and also institutions tend to still be very masculine at all levels. Water and agriculture institutions and the services they provide which have historically tended to, male farmers, are very ill designed to actually be addressing the needs of diverse groups of women who are coming into agriculture. Also the fact that, women's domestic work has not decreased. So their increasing agriculture work, the irrigation work happens first and foremost in addition to the domestic labor, but also the bulk of this work is in the informal sector. It's unorganized. It's something that does not get paid. So I think the issue, therefore, really begins that, I think the questions that we are not really asking ourselves is, what might women gain from engaging in water resources management or irrigation, in agriculture, work that is no longer attractive, not even to poor men. so who are drawing out of agriculture. So Sylvia Chand, a researcher professor at the London School of Economics, talks about the fact that the economic crisis globally and the nature of political changes globally, which are really fueled by different economic developments, have resulted in an intensified reliance on women's time, labor, bodies, and lives. And most times these extra demands on women to engage in irrigation, to engage in agriculture, happens in situations where women really have limited power to renegotiate these demands, or they have very little opportunities to choose from. and to sort of, without really assessing whether structural systemic issue inequalities, there's been an improvement in that, whether there's been a change in social relations, whether there's been a change in women's incomes or working conditions, it's very erroneous and very careless to equate women's engagement, increasing engagement in irrigation and agriculture, with women's empowerment. Yet, despite this fact, there is a tendency to do this. And once again, if you do Google and look at if you Google and look at women, irrigation, agriculture, you will see these narratives prominently, that this is really a positive change for women. So on an existing project called the Rewater MENA in Egypt, what we did was, we wanted to apply a feminist political ecology to really look at these issues of women's increasing involvement in irrigation. So applying a feminist political ecology actually necessitates, but also allows, looking beyond the community, looking beyond just women. It requires looking at the historical, political, economic context, which in Egypt is very much marked by colonialism, persisting patriarchy, and increasingly complex economic challenges. Then there is also the issue of really understanding water policies and seeing how they deviate from water practices and everyday experiences. And a third sort of pillar of applying a feminist political ecology is to really unpack the assumed homogeneity of women, and to really understand which women, to ask questions on which women are increasingly engaged in irrigation, and how are they experiencing these changes. So this is what we attempted to do on a project in Egypt. And what is really interesting is that, going beyond the scale of the community and looking at things more broadly really makes things very interesting. I think first and foremost is this paradox that Egypt is really an arid desert landscape. Only 4% of the total land in Egypt is arable, of which is fully irrigated, and the irrigation uses a disproportionate share of water. 86% of the total water use in Egypt goes to irrigation. And also what is very interesting is that even though Egypt imports 44% of cereals, food crops, it also exports cotton, which has come down now, contributes 15% of the GDP, but until the early part of the century, the figures were over 40%. So cotton cultivation for export in a very arid landscape, makes for an extremely paradoxical equation, which then sort of leads one to look at how was this very unwise decision made. So actually, it was after the American Civil War, as Brooke and others have written, that when it was very clear that there would be no longer slave trade and the cotton cultivation in the United States would be very difficult, that there was a search for new grounds for growing cotton, and Egypt, provided a really good next location from a colonial perspective. So that was what led to the decision of cotton cultivation in a very arid landscape. Now, what was very interesting that when cotton was introduced to Egypt, the peasant farmers, laborers refused to engage in cotton cultivation because it was a crop that they could neither eat nor feed their animals, So there wasn't really a lot of logic for them to grow cotton. So what transpired was that large land holdings and elite farmers who were growing cotton for export through the colonial system provided these small land holdings to tenant farm laborers called isbas. This is a picture that dates back to the 18th century, which was provided to the tenant peasant farmers to grow their own food so that they could be convinced to cultivating cotton for export. Now, in Egypt's post-colonization, there was a massive land redistribution program, and the isbas were handed over to, most isbas were handed over to the male heads of the tenant households, but the state still maintained a very firm control on production, which continues to date that the decision on what to grow, what sort of services are provided and support systems are provided for very specific crops. So that process which started in the 1950s continues to date. And Egypt continues to irrigate cotton, and as well as sugarcane, which is also very water intensive, and as well as wheat. Now, what is interesting is that how does Egypt manage to do this? And what's really interesting is that when you look at the statistics, Egypt actually uses more water than it has, which is also very strange, that Egypt's total annual water supply is 57.7 billion cubic meters, but it uses 72.4. And how does it do this? By reusing the water, the irrigation water. So what happens is that in Egypt, most of the irrigation water is reused, sometimes up to 5 times, through an extensive system of drainage canals, which were constructed parallel to the freshwater irrigation canals. Now, this water reuse initiative that started during the colonial period was initially designed to drain, the irrigation canal command areas, but then, during a drought period, it was realized that the water could also be reused. This very high water efficiency is really a national priority and pride in Egypt. And there is an emphasis to continue to emphasize on that, and policies emphasize that, that all reuse water requires a mixing of the wastewater with fresh water, and that cultivation, irrigation with just wastewater is not officially allowed in policy. But then, when you look deeper and look at the granular spatial dynamics of water reuse irrigation, you see things are quite different. And the point that I want to also emphasize here is how a feminist political ecology approach framework really allows connecting these different layers of historical, political, economic analyses with on-the-ground lived experiences of water use. So in the research, what we did was we looked at the very tail ends of the drainage canals, where we found that most of the irrigation happens almost exclusively with wastewater. So we wanted to find out who's actually using this water, and does it also include the large numbers of women who statistics and data point are increasingly engaging in agriculture and irrigation. And indeed, that's really true. What we found is that at the very tail end of these drainage canals, it's mostly very marginalized, resource-poor households who have very few other livelihood choices who are engaging in irrigation, in water reuse or wastewater irrigation. And a large number of the irrigators are actually women. And there are sharecropping arrangements in these former ISBAs, but the tenancy agreements are very informal, feudal, exploitative, really have this colonial legacy still persisting. The landlord, the male landlord, decides the choice of crops. He might provide other inputs or might not. It depends. It's because it's informal. The landlord collects 3/4 of the produce. The landlord is the member of the officiating member of the irrigation and agriculture collectives through which various services are organized. But because he does not himself practice farming, he is really not really actively engaged and emphasizing on the type and quality of water, that is being used in his fields. And even though what we found is that arrangements are mostly made in the patriarchal setting between the male landlord and the male head of the landless household, it is largely women who are providing labor. But we also found that here class really matters, that small landholders who are practicing farming and are not sharecroppers, then in these households, women tend to not work in the fields, or in households where the male head has some other means of income, there is a tendency for women to not work. So yes, the patriarchal norm persists, but where it's ruptured and where it's broken is not necessarily empowering for women. And of course, the women irrigators, are not allowed access, don't have any outreach to the irrigation and agriculture collectives. So a lot of labor health risks of working with quite polluted wastewater, because contrary to policy, there isn't always a mixing of waste and fresh water, to the extent that when possible and where possible, the irrigators try not to consume the produce that they grow on these fields irrigated entirely with reused water. But that also has problems for women, because the value of crops grown with wastewater is very low comparatively in the market. So, you can fetch a better price for the produce if you can take it far away from the actual place of production, so that a link can't be established as to where the crop was produced. But of course, women would not be able to move so far away to sell produce from here. So what happens is that even in households where there is an opportunity to sell this produce grown with waste or reused water, women do not really have a chance and opportunity to engage in the market and be in control of the income of their labor.
Deepa, we have 2 minutes left, if you don't mind.
Sure, I'm almost at the very end of my stage of my presentation. So, so for all the work, there's very little food security, and the incomes for women are very marginal. And in fact, women keep livestock for food and daily income. Now, I mention this because, there is so much investment at a national level on irrigation and water reuse irrigation. But if you look at how it trickles down, it's really not benefiting the most marginalized of women who are practicing irrigated agriculture. So, the very last slide, what I want to add here is that, therefore, feminist political ecology perspective, or rather feminist perspective, allows looking at these complex trade-offs and understanding that gender and water is much more than just about engaging women, and that it's really about fixing structural systemic challenges, addressing patriarchy, economic inequalities, the drivers of agriculture, irrigation, investments, and also policy priorities and mandates, and also perhaps for the most marginalized who are not going to benefit, it's also investing in social protection. So our findings really, align with this new initiative in Egypt, which is called Haya Karima, which I think is a really sensible initiative, which says that, in various interventions, the human dimension should take precedence about everything else, and there's an immediate and urgent need to enable Egyptian citizens to have a more dignified life and rights to a more decent life. So I end with my very last slide, which is really an invitation to you. So we've just put together an invite for papers on the Frontiers in Human Dynamics journal, and we are asking for researchers to join us in writing about how to change this discourse. How do we disrupt this very apolitical narrative of women and water, which persists alongside what we see and experience as very patriarchal, hierarchical, and almost technocratic water institutions and agendas? And how do we move forwards to real change through more systemic transformations in deep-rooted power politics, masculinities, and water economics? So the abstract submission deadline is the 21st of November. I would welcome those interested to please look at the journal and engage with us on this topic, which really needs to be, very radically and I think bravely tackled. Thank you so much. That's it from me.
Thank you very much, Deepa. Thank you very, very much for this insightful presentation, making us aware of the importance, the relevance of gender in water issues. We have we don't have a lot of time left, but I see there are a number of questions in the Q&A box already. So I'm just going to start from the bottom. Someone is asking, thank you for your informative presentation. While much gender work has focused on women, it seems to me the problem is men. With the UN, World Bank, IMF, etc., still dominated by men, how do we proceed? Are water-specific interventions useful, or should we be focusing on women-man education, for example?
Take that question, Roy.
Did you hear it? Did you hear me?
I did hear it, yes. So yes, I think that's very right. And feminist researchers have very, very long ago called for tackling, for sort of really addressing the status quo and for addressing the structural systemic issues of patriarchy and masculinity that persists, and especially, and as you rightly point out, at the very centers of economic power. And it's not just a case of bringing women on board. I think that is one way to approach it, but because, if you were to simply leave it at bringing women on board, it could also simply translate to bringing elite women on board whose experiences might not match the changes that are needed on the ground. So it requires bringing very diverse perspectives and experiences to inform, the larger economic design of how we do development. And I think after COVID, we were talking about business as unusual and a rebooting of the system, but I don't know how much of that is rhetoric and how much of that, will actually translate to some disruption in these systems.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. So there is another question. The first question is a little bit related to it as well. It's focusing on ensuring sustainable maintenance of water infrastructure post-construction. You talked about this earlier on in your presentation. If community-based management does not work, what needs to be done in your view? Is it just financial resources, also training, for example? And what gender challenges in community-based management need to be addressed post-construction? And how? Does this also involve the role of men and women?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I could answer all of your very good questions in this very short presentation, but I think fundamentally what it's calling for is that there has to be substantial public sector investment in water infrastructure, because water is so relevant to human well-being and to women's dignity and opportunities for women. So I think that should not be left alone to what could work and what would not work as community-based management initiatives. So I think fundamentally that's the point that needs to be made quite strongly. Mm-hmm. But I think the other problem that I talked about is, yes, I think if you do go the community management way, then I think you need like not just technical capacity and strengthening, but you also need initiatives which can address some of the gender and the exclusion practices that persist, so that there is more equal decision making and the interests and needs of those who are more marginalized are better addressed through these community level initiatives. That often does not happen because there is a lot of elite capture that happens at the community level.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm afraid we will have to leave it at this. Thank you so much, Deepa, for your presentation, for your keynote. Very, very insightful. We kept our fingers crossed that there were challenges on your side as well. You gave us a great overview of the challenges when it comes to the relationship of water and gender, but we managed to get through the presentation without serious interruptions. I wish you well. Thank you very much for being with us here online today. Thank you to the audience for your questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all the questions. We'll send them to Dr. Yoshi and see if she can still have a look at those. I'm going to have a short break, or we are going to have a short break for 3 minutes. And then I'll briefly introduce the first panel session for today to you. So we'll take a 3 minutes break, and I hope to see you again at 5 minutes to the hour. Thank you all very, very much. That was a very short break. Welcome back, everybody. It's time now for the panel session. It's my pleasure to introduce the panel moderator to you. I'll just give you a very short overview of her bio. The moderator of the first panel session today is Dr. Lina Tang. She's the director of the Water Without Borders Graduate Diploma Program and a senior researcher, Water and Health at UNU INWE, the United Nations University, and Institute for Water, Environment and Health at McMaster University in Canada. Lina has over a decade of research, project management, and capacity building experiences in the WASH and HIV sectors. And at UNU INWE, she leads the thematic direction on interactions between water management and human health. She coordinated and led interdisciplinary and intersectoral teams focusing on improving basic water and health services for the urban and rural poor, and served as a consultant for governments, parastatals, health providers, and NGOs in Southern and Eastern Africa. Lina, thank you very much for joining us from Hamilton. I'm happy to hand over the floor to you.
Need to unmute. So thank you so much, Roy, for having me today. I'm pleased to be here. Welcome, everyone, to the first panel session for the third day of the Water Institute Conference. As Roy noted, my name is Lina Tang, and I'm the Water and Health Lead at UNU INWE, which is the UN's only think tank on water. I'm happy to present today on gender equality and empowering women and girls with this amazing panel. Before I introduce them, I just want to note that the purpose of this panel session is to hear from our panelists about who they are, what they worked on in the QES program, what the practical outcome was, how they experienced the international and local collaborations, and how these collaborations helped the successful outcomes of the projects and what lessons they learned. We're specifically focusing thematically on gender equality and empowering women and girls in relation to the SDG agenda. So don't be surprised if you hear a lot today, not just about SDG 6, clean water and sanitation, but also SDG 5, gender equality. I'm going to go through the first round of introductions. So Moon, can I start with you? Can you briefly introduce yourself and tell us what your field of expertise is and what you worked on in the QES program and with whom?
Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are joining us from. Thank you so much, Lina. My name is Mwimaneno Njungu. I am pleased to say I just completed my doctoral program at the University of Waterloo in the School of Public Health. I am currently a faculty member at the Copperbelt University in Zambia's Copperbelt province. And I also have a medical background in clinical practice where I've worked in Zambia and Namibia for a good number of years. So for my doctoral research, which was largely funded by the QES program, I was interested in the effects of flooding on access to care, but using a systems theoretical framework to understand how the different contextual factors interact to influence outcomes with a view to informing potential program developers and policy makers. So the aim of my research really was to apply the systems thinking framework and to the investigation of factors influencing maternal and child health services, as I mentioned. So the objectives were to identify the effects of flooding on access to care in the flood-prone areas of Western Province. And for my research, I focused on 4 districts that are lined along the Zambezi floodplains, which is one of the main river systems in Africa. The second objective was to explore the perceptions of environmental change among residents of the Zambezi floodplains and how these changes influence health outcomes. And then based on those findings, I wanted to also understand the interaction of these contextual factors on public health interventions that are in place for maternal health services. And then in so doing, identify potential areas of strengthening those interventions. For my research, I took a qualitative design so that I could understand these factors. And this was based mainly on interviews and focus group discussions with health managers, healthcare providers, and health service users in the 4 districts. And in terms of a summary of the findings, really, some of the effects of flooding that were identified were in relation to disruption of service delivery during flood seasons, and then also disruption of transportation routes and access routes to the different facilities because of destruction of the infrastructure which is in place, which is already not in the best of states, but is worsened during flood seasons. There were also reported negative economic consequences, which would also translate into challenges with accessing transportation. And in terms of the second objective, which was looking at the perspectives of local communities in relation to environmental changes, most of their experiences was in relation to the changes in seasons, in terms of timing of the seasons, in terms of duration of the seasons. For example, while these communities experience seasonal flooding even before, for a long time, there has been an increasing intensity in flooding and alternating with intense drought seasons. And so this was the main challenge that they talked about, as well as the devastation of both intense floods and droughts on their economic activity, which is mainly agriculture for most of the community members in these places. So consequently, residents resort to alternative methods of treating their health challenges, resulting in outcomes that may be less than optimal. For example, because of that, there are a lot of, let's say, an increase in the number of home deliveries versus institutional deliveries, so that those home deliveries have also associated with an increase in complications of childbirth, both for mothers and the newborns. Then in terms of the interaction of contextual factors, we found that mainly there were issues to do with the organization of health services in terms of the distribution, and a long-standing challenge with human resource, which is familiar to those who would have worked in these parts of the world. Then there were also issues with social cultural factors, including poverty and traditional practices that surround childbirth. And then there were environmental challenges, including the long distances to the health facilities and increasing intensity of floods, and further complicating how they traverse the flood plains, and then negatively affecting the livelihoods of individuals, and consequently how they access health services. In terms of my experience with the QES program, I was blessed and honored to have participated in the water courses that were offered through the Water Institute as part of the program. And during this time, that was a very rich learning experience, because it was a time that emphasized intersectoral, interdisciplinary collaboration, which was one of the areas of interest even in my research, and a potential area of strengthening the local environment and the local players in the districts where I was conducting my research. And I don't know how much
Wonderful,
time
Wim.
is remaining for me, but
I should have actually cut you off several minutes ago, but I was so entranced. Apologies to the rest of the group, but I do have
Okay.
some follow-up questions for you. I will come back to you if that's okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Wim. Rogers, on to you. Can I ask you briefly to introduce yourself?
Okay, thank you very much, Lina, and good morning and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rogers Taebwa, and I work with Uganda Christian University, and I head the Engineering and Environment Department. I should say briefly, as a QES scholar, I worked on the impact of water inaccessibility on rural women's health and livelihoods in Uganda. And the specific variables of interest were basically the accessibility, the access with distance to water sources, especially for portability, but also functionality of water facilities. And of course, we are looking at several factors in terms of functionality, including the technology used, but also the quality, the yield, and then other variables, like of course, which are influenced by scarcity and stress that eventually affect the water quality of the point sources of water accessed by different people. So if I may give a small context to this, is that in Uganda, when you look at the Uganda National Water Policy, which is of course a bigger policy under SDG 5, it provides a framework for the water sector, of course, which recognizes the importance of gender. And normally it is very clear that women's involvement in design, construction, operation and maintenance of the improved water sanitation facilities is one of the core components that should be supported through training. And this is very clear in our water policy, which is a stronger policy in line with the SDG 5, but also SDG 6. So briefly, I should also say that this policy also provides for participation of women, and of course, men have that equal opportunity to participate in full aspects of community-based management of water resources, so that there is no discrimination. Thank you, Lina.
Thank you so much, Rogers. That's really interesting. One quick question. When you say that women were involved in the design of water and sanitation facilities, how did that perspective impact design, out of curiosity?
Come again.
How would
please.
that have impacted design, or did it impact design?
So what I'm trying to say is that the gender mainstreaming process within the water and sanitation sector is not a new thing in Uganda, because it started as early as the 1990s. So most of the previous projects which have been implemented here in Uganda, like the rural and water sanitation projects, there was big emphasis on gender equality, both female and male, especially with the expertise within the operation and maintenance, but also the design of the water systems. Maybe I should say that in Africa, especially here in Uganda, previously what was happening is that women and children were literally taking part in probably fetching and collecting of water, implying that the other gender was not typically involved, which was also a very big challenge. But as a result of the inclusion of women, children, but of course also men in the operation and maintenance, but also in the initial designs, this has necessitated, of course, the improvement and also implementation of SDG 5 and SDG 6. This means that now also women have been empowered to have access to clean water sources, but also creating more time for a girl child to get better education, good hygiene and health, but also social life, which is a very good thing for creating career development for all gender, both female and male.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rogers. Looking forward to hearing from more about your projects. Sajida, can you introduce yourself briefly, please?
Hi, everyone. Good morning and good evening. Thank you so much, Roy, for inviting me as a panelist in this discussion. Yeah, my name is Sajda Sultana, and I worked on this QES funded research, which is about, climate smart agriculture and how it impacted the overall agriculture sector in Sindh province specifically. So the main few themes of my research are mainly on talking about, the knowledge system of climate smart agriculture and how this knowledge system is translated at the ground level. How is it impacting the women? Is it helping them to understand the climate smart agriculture practices or not? And the other main theme is like how to look into the social, political, cultural, and economic factors or drivers, you can say, that are directly impacting the knowledge system and making sure that climate smart agriculture is available for people on ground. And then the last part was mainly to look into the different stakeholders that were involved in the implementation and development of overall knowledge system for climate smart agriculture. And this mainly has a very major theme to look at how women were involved and how they have been considered in climate smart agriculture, and are these activities really geared toward the development of specifically women in that sector or not. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sajda. Kervin, I know that you've had so much difficulty this morning connecting, so thank you so much for managing. Can you briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Jevina Patinga. I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Geography and Planning, the University of Saskatchewan, and I was lucky to win the QS scholarship, which I was to use to go to Uganda to look at the impact of water inaccessibility on women's health and livelihoods, both in Ghana and then Uganda. So basically, that I'm looking at water and gender, how water access or poor water access affects women's health and livelihoods in rural communities in Ghana and then Uganda.
Wonderful. So I take it that you're still in the process of your research. You have no main outcomes yet to report.
Yeah. For the research, I'm currently collecting my data, and so far, what I've collected, you've seen that poor water access really affects women in terms of their livelihoods and health. So we're looking at musculoskeletal pain, like back pains, body pains, and then walking more than 1 kilometer to fetch water is also an issue in where I am collecting my data. And you can see that based on observations, you can see that maybe 5 or 6 boreholes are serving a whole community or population of more than 2,500. So you can imagine. So, and it's a dispersed settlement where most of these women, and patriarchal gender norms, women are responsible for water fetching in our part of the world. So that these women have to walk longer distances to access these facilities. Sometimes these facilities break down, making it difficult for them to access water. And you can see that sometimes they have to forgo their livelihood activities such as farming, trading, to access water on time or early in the morning or in the evening. So far, that is what I'm getting. But I haven't finished yet. Finished the first phase of the data collection, waiting to do the second phase and then the third phase of the data collection. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Those are really interesting preliminary findings, looking at both your physical and social and emotional well-being outcomes. Yes?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Gervin. Okay, so we're on to the second round of questions. I hope everyone's ready, where we want to dig a little bit deeper into the experiences of each of the QES scholars and how they're starting to embed this, what they've learned into their new work and their new projects. So Wim, back to you. I would now like to ask you how you experienced the setup of the QES program with international collaborators in Canada and elsewhere, and reflect especially on that strong local embedding and engagement. How have you experienced these collaborations, and how did they contribute ultimately to your project outcomes?
Thank you, Lena. So for my experience with the project, I think the fact that I was based at the University of Waterloo and able to work with my supervisor, who I believe is in the conference, and the team of others that were from the districts that were the focus areas of my research, that is a demonstration of the potential and the ability to influence positively what is happening on the ground. The one challenge that I did come across was, while the program was really focused on strengthening capacity at local level, what I saw, or what was re-emphasized to me, is a challenge that has been present for a long time, which is mainly the challenge on staffing. So that while the interest and the efforts are there in terms of capacity building for local players, the challenges with staffing are such that there's a lot of rotation of staff moving in the ministry, for instance, so that capacity can be built up in one area, but it may not be long-term if staff members are not permanent in those areas. So that's one aspect. That also plays into how maybe in terms of gender focus, one thing I wanted to mention in the initial round was that, for example, my own research work, while the interest the outcome of interest was on how women access health services. And in the initial plan and design, the intention was to have gender differentiated focus group discussions so that we hear specifically from women in terms of how they are experiencing the local issues. But when it came to actual practice, and during data collection, one of the challenges of many was that I was doing my data collection during the COVID pandemic. And there were a lot of challenges with research dealing with human subjects, as everyone is aware. And also there were challenges in terms of timing, and that was available for the actual data collection, which meant that while because of the distances involved in these areas, we didn't have enough time to mobilize groups of women to be able to gather together and have focus groups like that. So we had to settle for mixed focus group discussions, which meant that we did get some observations and perceptions of women, but it was not maybe in an exclusive setup. So that was a challenge in terms of focusing on the issue of gender and affecting the practical outcome. So in terms of how the outcomes of the research are embedding or helping my work at the moment, it's strengthened some of my work. I'm involved in teaching public health and system related issues to medical students in our university. So that the experience has given me a wider experience so that I can speak to things, and they relate because they are in the local environment. Yeah, I think that's what I can say for now. I can't hear you, Lena.
You are muted.
Apologies. No, I can imagine, Lynn, thank you for that really insightful comment, Sri. I can imagine conducting research during the COVID era was very challenging. And as you noted, the staffing as well as general access affecting your international collaboration as well as your ability to embed yourself does sound like it was a huge constraint for your research, but I'm glad that you're able to overcome that. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so thank you, Mwim, so much for that. Rogers, back to you. What lessons did you learn on your project? And sorry, there are two more questions. How easy or difficult did you find it to achieve the SDG goals, in your opinion? And what is needed for this? What barriers are there in your view?
Okay, thank you, Lina. Thank you once again. Lessons learned. One, I think there should be a linkage of these research findings, like we conducted, what is actually on the ground, so that we can help fix these gaps in communities. Like, for example, training the water user committees, and how to properly maintain and operate some of these water facilities. But also, we noticed that there should there be a need to conduct more applied research so that we can address some of the gaps in achieving SDGs. For example, we noticed that however much sustainable development goals are being implemented in several countries, even our country, Uganda here, we noticed that there are challenges leaving probably the gender blind, hence making it complicated to get access to some of these water and probably sanitation facilities. So they are not necessarily catered for, especially when you look at distance, when you look at quality, technology used, and so forth. But also more awareness and sensitization, I think, is key because it is very evident, especially like in Uganda, where the rural population still thinks certain water sources are highly safe for potability, for drinking purposes, like especially groundwater sources. And research, for example, in most urban areas, here it shows that most of the groundwater sources have a lot of fecal coliforms, which means they are contaminated. So it might not be the case as people think. So we need to sensitize people that what they are consuming may not necessarily be safe without any form of pre-treatment. But also, it is also wise for governments to prioritize access to clean water and sanitation services so that people can get potable water for domestic consumption. How easy or difficult to achieve SDGs? In my opinion, I think training, sensitization, because we have institutions on the ground, like through the water user committees, district committees, so that we avoid fecal-related diseases. But also more professionals in the sector required, especially looking at the issue of gender equality. This means different workplaces, governments, healthcare, education systems should be designed and provide gender equality, of course, which makes a tremendous gap to address the gender gap. We also think more research to back up community needs and, of course, addressing policy gaps is very relevant. Take an example. When you look at the SDG report of Uganda 2019, the policy gap analysis actually makes it explicit that SDG targets that the country has been prioritizing from then up to today are evident from the policies the country has, the gender policies, the water policies, and etc. But the analysis pinpoints the nature of commitments expressed to SDG targets. For example, reduction of maternal mortality rather than its umbrella of SDG 3 on ensuring healthy lives and promoting well-being of all ages. So that is a little bit tricky. So when you look at maternal mortality vis-a-vis SDG 3, ensuring healthy lives and promotion of well-being at all ages, there's still some gap. So which of course demonstrates some level of probably maybe not achieving what we want. More funding so that communities can access advanced and affordable technologies, but also multidisciplinary studies of different practitioners, the social scientists, the scientists, engineers, to address gaps, women empowerment, but also technologies to probably cater for the physically incapable people, such as the lame and the blind, looking at the distance, but also the technology. Finally, maybe barriers in my view, the SDG 5 on gender equality, when you look at the National Development Plan 2019 of Uganda, of course, which is referenced from the SDGs, it commits to increasing access to land and land titles for women and other vulnerable groups. However, this report or this assessment does not specify any program or policy by which probably like the government of Uganda has or will seek to undertake such measures. So this NDP2 National Development Plan 2 of Uganda, which is referenced from the GDP, from the SDGs, does not specify how successful this will be at the end of that period, however much it is written, which is also a serious barrier. But also there's less expertise in implementation of some of these SDGs. So we need technical personnel and also the scientific approach towards solving issues like water quality issues. Then, of course, low funding affecting some policies like gender policies, employment policies in our country. And then the academia is not properly linked to the industry. So most of the research done may be for academic purposes, but it is not directly actually impacting the gaps within the industry to address real applied questions through research, and that's a big barrier. We also see the increase in population size. For example, here in Uganda, we're about 45 million. So planning for a 45 million population, which grows at a rate of 3.3% per annum, is a little bit complex as far as water access to water and sanitation services is concerned. Then we also have emerging epidemics and pandemics, like, for example, Ebola, COVID-19, etc. And if I may give an example here, it was evident within the last 3 years of the COVID-19 pandemic, access to clean water for hand washing, because of course communities couldn't handle procuring or purchasing the sanitizer, but mere hand washing was limited, which of course affected the levels to implement the SDGs due to poverty levels in several communities in the country. So I should give probably maybe a snapshot that households, majority of the households, and this is about the poverty status report here in our country, about 19% are unable to pay for piped water supply, which is supplied in urban centers. This shows that we have several who earn less than 130 USD per month, and majority struggle to pay for these bills, which makes it more complicated. And maybe finally, there's also limited access to piped water supplies. The coverage is a little bit low, and also in urban centers, so the rural communities are used to other water sources, protected springs, hand dug wells, and boreholes, and etc., which of course are tricky because the quality has been compromised, and hence, of course, outbreak of fecal oral related diseases, which is also tricky. So thank you very much. Over to you, back.
Thank you, Rogers. That was a very comprehensive analysis of various challenges for achieving SDGs, as well as the various barriers affecting access to care and the achievement of gender equality. Thank you so much. Sajida, do you recognize what the lessons learned are by your colleagues, and what were your experience out of curiosities? Did you also have, was your research also influenced by the pandemic?
Thank you, Lena. So yes, overall, I think experience with QES was really great, especially, the freedom of choosing your own ground, on-ground partners so that, you can conduct your research at ground level. So I was lucky because of, two things. One, that, the time at when I started my research was the very good time, because Pakistan at that time was, in the middle of finalizing their climate smart agriculture policy at national level. And I hope and I think my research also helped them to, look into the few major things that I've tried to discuss in my research. So that was one main thing, that, doing a research at the time when policy is being made on something definitely helps them, and also help you to understand how, what factors they are including in the policy and how it's gonna look like at the end, like a final product, right? The second thing is, choosing the local partner when you're doing your research. So again, because I worked with the United Nations for a very long time, and I was lucky to have UNDP Deaf Small Grants Program there to support me in my research. So it was really good to work with them, because they have a very good, well-spread network of different NGOs working with the communities on ground. And then, so when I was conducting my research, I was able to, reach out to even those areas where probably if I was just, going as a researcher from Waterloo would have been difficult, because there are many cultural issues, many, like woman-related, things that, people really don't feel comfortable to talk about. And so, but when you have a local people support, they actually, train you to make sure that you are aware of those things, sensitive things and cultural things when you're talking to women, especially, and they in the field. So I was lucky in that way to have UNDP Small Grants Program. And then also I was connected with Agriculture University in Sindh. So that's one of the biggest research institute. You can also say they're already had a lot of researches done. So when I joined, them for this research, they were very helpful to understand, to help me to, understand the background perspective while, talking about the climate smart agriculture. So this was the good point. And then, whether this was helpful in the sense that, like during the pandemic, as you said. So, but I was lucky enough to complete my research right before pandemic started. So, I completed it in like December 2019. So all the data collection and everything was done before, that. So that was not as such a hindrance in my research, COVID perspective. But what I also learned is that, there are like multiple factors when you go into the field. You're not like looking into those factors, because you have one main theme that you want to do your research on, and that's how you go in the field. But when I reached there, so I realized that, there are so many other things that should be, and then later on, I was able to, include them in my research. For example, you were aware of, current floods in Pakistan. So yeah, in Sindh, also in KP province. So due to these recurring floods after every 8, 7 or 10 years, what happens is that, people in those areas are not actually recovering from the actual disaster. And then another disaster is hitting after some times. So what happens is that, when you're going as a researcher to see how, the new technologies or how we are going to help them with to, mitigate climate change and the impact of climate change, it is very important to see if those communities are actually recovered from the previous disaster or not. And then if we are talking about climate smart agriculture, are they able to adapt the technologies of climate smart agriculture, or they are still recovering from the disaster that they faced a few years ago? There are economic factors and political factors. If the country is politically unstable, or economic factor means that they don't have basic necessities of life. Their children are not going to schools. They don't have food for 3 times a day. Then their basic focus would be how to get the basic necessities of life, not looking into the what new technology is coming to support them. So it's a kind of a way of a combination of things, I would say, when we are going in the field and discussing these things with or collecting the data from people, we should understand their problems as well, to make sure that you're coming up with the final product that has that has clubbed everything together, and we are providing them a complete package of how their needs will be taken care of, in addition to if we are providing a knowledge or information about climate smart agriculture technologies. So I would say when we go and implement such kind of policies at ground level, it's very important to see if they're ready to listen to you, or if it is really helping them in their lives or not. Like if there is no water, there is a strong water shortage, in Sindh provinces where I did my research. So when there is a water shortage, you cannot talk about certain climate smart agriculture technologies, because those are all related to water availability. And if water is not there, then there's no point of implementing those certain technologies in the ground level. So that is something which I found that if I'm doing something at ground level, I should make sure to spread the word that the basic necessities are very important for people, especially women. We are talking about their health, we are talking about their role in agriculture sector. In Pakistan is one of those countries, I think all other panelists and Deepa also mentioned that they're contributing a lot in agriculture sector, but they're not getting enough from agriculture sector. They are being less paid. They're working a lot with the house chores, and then also going in the field to do a lot of work in agriculture lands. So this perspective is important, and this is, I think, where QES can further help in this kind of research, is to understand now, after when Pakistan has already developed the climate smart agriculture policy, is it really helping people? Like maybe this would be the next round of research for them to see that in this disaster, these disasters coming every other year, and also when we have this policy, does this policy includes all those factors that are unforeseen factors, or you can say they are foreseen factors, but then are these really considered or not? So I think there is a lot of scope of research, and it should not be stopped here. I think it should be continued to see the progress.
Wonderful.
I hope I answered your questions.
No, you did, and you went beyond. I'm just sorry that we don't have enough time to build upon that, because you brought up so many great reflections on research in general, whether or not it was influenced by the pandemic. I mean, regardless, it shows that you had to adapt on the ground, on the spot, right? Based on the local conditions. You stress the importance of gatekeepers, but also besides gatekeepers, having to build that sensitivity when talking to, well, here it was your target group for your research participants. I'm very happy to hear that the QES program contributed to your capacity building as a researcher over time, and what you brought up as key areas of future interest to QES. Definitely, I hope the program takes note. Thank you so much, Sajida. Gervin, please share what are your experiences and how were they influenced by the pandemic?
Oh, okay. For my research, I finished my comms in I think 2021. So I was ready to go to the field design, and I applied for ethics. But it's like the pandemic came and stole everything. So I think it was that same period I had the opportunity to get a QS scholarship. So I was looking at two study sites. I was looking at Uganda and Ghana. So I was supposed to travel to Uganda to conduct my study, but the COVID came and the pandemic came and stalled the whole process. So I think through the QS, I was able to I get in touch with other QS scholars. One is Rogers. Rogers is on the panel right now. So I was able to get in touch with him in Uganda through my professors. So through them, we were able to brainstorm maybe if they could assist me to collect my data there. So currently, because of the pandemic, I wasn't able to travel to Uganda. So they are there to help me collect this data to complete my project. That's why I came to Ghana. But as they are there, they'll be able to help me to collect this data to complete my project. So I think through QS, I'm able to develop some networking. I'm able to network to help me collect my data where I cannot travel to because of the pandemic to complete my project so far. Yeah.
No, that's thank you so much for sharing that. And again, like Sajida was saying, that importance of networking in order to, well, think on your feet and finding new connections as necessary when looking for new gatekeepers. Well, thank you so much, Nguyen, Roger, Sajida, and Gervin for sharing your experiences. We actually covered the first and second round of questions in record timing. So this gives us a little bit more time to dig a little bit deeper, especially when we're talking about that women and gender equality outcomes that we want to achieve in the SDG era. I mean, based on our various discussions together, what everyone shared, I'm wondering, is there anything else that as a group we might want to add to this broader discussion? I'm going to frame this though around a gender integration scale that we previously discussed together and Rogers started to hint at. So for those of you that aren't familiar, UNU, United Nations University, devised a gender integration scale that builds upon an IDRC scale, rating essentially how the topic and themes of gender are incorporated into programming. So you have 5 different steps, of which the first notices if a project is gender blind, in which there is no consideration of gender, spanning to some gender awareness and sensitivity, where you might have incorporation in terms of overall research objectives, but they might not be incorporated in methods, and gender responsiveness and transformation, where you do see outcomes, research outcomes and project outcomes tied to change. What I hear from a lot of the projects that each of you are working on, there is that potential for gender responsive and gender transformative aspects of the various water and health projects that you're working on. So how do we make this happen? How do we make sure that we don't just note that this is an issue that we need to address, but make this a reality, especially for the women that you worked with in field?
Yeah, so can I talk about it?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so I think in some countries, and I'm sure also in most of the developing countries, you can say what is happening is that usually these, when the research is done or when the policy is made based on that research, we have started involving women in the sense that, like how we are highlighting them in those reports and in those policies. But what is important is that, after such policies are being made, are we going back and, checking this question, especially with women, if they're comfortable and like if these policies are actually translated at that level or not. Yes, those, SDG 5 or like any other relevant SDGs that are, helping women are highlighted usually in those policies. But what I see is that usually they're not implemented in the real sense at ground level. And so there, so I think understanding the cultural sensitivity, I think important is to see how we can engage them in the discussion of how they want it to be implemented and when they want it to be implemented. So a lot of discussion at ground level with women is still needed, and discussion where they're more comfortable. Like for example, in my research, what I've noticed is that, when I was interviewing women, men wanted to be there anyways, like if there is a group of women, so men will make sure, okay, so who are the women from this particular village who are going to talk, and who will not talk about it, and like a selection of interviews and who to be interviewed is very much in hands of men. So when we go, we find out that, like it's not easy to pick any random, female from the group and just interview them. So they are directed on like who will be, providing the information in particular. So those kind of, biases or like, you can say influence that we see when we do the research, that should be eliminated, and how we can eliminate them, So what I noticed is that, building a relationship with the community is very important. Or when you're going to the community, making sure that, you're able to make those women speak up freely, easily, and they're comfortable to talk to you about their issues, and you're able to provide them security in the sense that their information is confidential and it's not being shared here and there, especially with names or with faces all around. So even when I was taking pictures of with women, so getting their consent specifically, so these kind of things are important to make sure that community they are comfortable to talk about any kind of issue that they are facing, whether before we make the policies and do the research, or after making the policy and research.
Thank you, Sajida. That's really insightful feedback about how might we actually realize policy? How can we translate that into action? By drawing a lot actually from research practice, right? Ethical research practices to ensure that women's voices are heard in very important, impactful policies. So we only have 1 more minute or so. Is there any last words that the panelists would like to say when we're talking about translating and achieving well, gender equality for all? Yes, I thought I heard someone. And well, thank you everyone again. Lynn, Rogers, Sajida, and Gervin, it was a very insightful discussion. Just to summarize, each of your projects looking at different aspects of how women and girls are impacted by lack of services or their lack of participation in important design for whether it's technology and services. And what I hear loud and clear from each of your sessions is that it's a very important that this voice is not excluded, because as a result, you have impacts not just on SDG 5 in terms of gender equality, SDG 3 or SDG 6 in terms of access to healthcare and services, but we are also then not addressing SDG number 1, which is ending poverty, right? Economic development, education outcomes are highly impacted when we do not incorporate and integrate gender equality into our development solutions. And reflecting on everyone's experiences from what you've gained as your QES scholars, I'm really hoping that you incorporate and you continue to work on build upon what you've learned in your future work to ensuring that we do realize SDG 5 and SDG 6 together. Yeah. Thank you. All the best for the rest of the panel. And I'm going to have to return this mic back to Roy because we've come to the end of this panel session. Thank you again to the panelists and thank you for the audience for listening in. Back to you, Roy.
Thank you very much, Lena. You made my job very easy. It's time for a break. Thank you, Lena. Thank you, Rogers, Nguyen, Sayida, and Gervin, giving us this amazing overview around the world, from Uganda to Zambia to Ghana to Pakistan. Very, very insightful and great stories for us to hear. So 10 minutes break. Please be back in online in 9 minutes, and then we'll have the final panel discussion of the conference. Welcome back, everyone. It's now time for the last panel session, in which we will try to come to some conclusions at the end of the conference. And it's my pleasure to introduce the panel moderator to you, my colleague, Professor Susan Elliott. Susan is professor in the Department of Geography and Environmental Management and also the University Research Chair in Medical Geography at the University of Waterloo. She's an adjunct professor with the UNU INVE and a research lead for the Allergen National Centers of Excellence on Gene-Environment Interactions and Allergic Disease. In Waterloo, Susan leads her lab called Geographies of Health in Place. Susan, thank you for moderating this last session.
Thank you, Roy. And it has been just such a tremendous experience. I can't believe we're at the end of the 3-day process, how quickly it's gone and how much I've learned. So as Roy said, I'm Susan Elliott from the University of Waterloo. I'm a water health researcher with a lot of gender in there too. I'm very happy to be here to moderate this final session. I was really fortunate to be at the very beginning of the QAS inception in 2014 when the first call for proposals went out, and was really fortunate to receive funding to support 4 fully funded PhD students, many of whom you saw throughout the week, who are now in assistant professor positions and other leadership positions. And this panel is going to talk about, now that we've got this amazing network, and I just quickly went on the QES website to see what that network looks like. By the end of 2022, there are meant to be at least 3,000 Queen Elizabeth scholars existing around the world. That's amazing. And that's in addition to 650 partner organizations. So it's just amazing what this organization, what this funding opportunity has created for us. And so the focus, what we're going to talk about is not only how are we addressing the SDGs, but how are we going to not only sustain that network, but enhance and grow that network and keep it going. So it's my tremendous pleasure to have our panelists with us this morning. I'm going to introduce each of them or call on them one at a time and give them a couple of minutes to talk about who they are and what they did in the QES and talk about their network a little bit and what they worked on. So I'm going to start with you, Diana Karanja, to introduce yourself, talk about your field of expertise, what you do, what you did inside of QES, and with whom, and what the main outcomes were. Oh, sorry, wrong one. How you experience the international and local collaborations. Let's start with that question. What you do and how you experience local and international collaborations within the QES. You're on mute, my friend. Got it.
Thank you very much, Susan. For me too, it has been an amazing week, and I too have learned a lot. It was really good to see some of the people we worked with and some of the people who are also working within the Queen Elizabeth Scholar, but whom we probably didn't have time to meet, but now I've met them. My name is Diana Karanja, and currently I'm CEO for Community Health Support Program. This is a non-government organization based in Kenya, Kisumu, Kenya. And basically we tend to mobilize resources for health generally, but we have a lot of work that we do with communities related to water and sanitation. A lot of the work we do is with children and adolescents and in the communities. And then we also work with women. We have a lot of work we do with women in water and sanitation. And realizing that, like economic resources, financial resources are very critical in terms of water and sanitation. So when we work with women in water and sanitation, we also work with them to do some sort of economic empowerment whereby they can be able to afford water and sanitation, because nothing comes free. So that's what I do at the moment. And prior to that, and when I was collaborating with a lot of the QES scholars, I was working for Kenya Medical Research Institute. That is a government institution that is tasked with research in Kenya. And I worked with a lot of students from University of Waterloo who are being supervised by Susan Elliott. And I would say we've had a really, really good collaboration. When I was with Kenya Medical Research Institute, I was mostly working with neglected tropical diseases. with a focus on schistosomiasis. Schistosomiasis is a water-related disease, and so a lot of the work I did within KEMRI was water-related diseases, and schistosomiasis was central to that. So our collaboration with the Queen Elizabeth Scholar has been really very rewarding as far as we are concerned from an institutional point of view. Working with a government institute, that's a research organization, so a lot of research work is done there, but working with community health support program, NGOs or non-governmental organizations are often perceived as implementers as opposed to researchers. So working with the universities and research organizations, that really strengthened our research aspect of the non-government organization. So from a scholar's point of view, I think what they had hoped to gain from working with us was to gain skills in research and also to better understand the communities, which are usually the recipients of their research. And we really enjoyed that, and we think our scholars were able to really benefit from both angles. It's a two-way street. So they benefited and we benefited from this international collaboration with the students as well as with the universities. And I would say we built relationships that I think will last for a long time. Let me stop
Thank
there.
you, Diana. That's great. That's exactly the kind of language that we want to hear for sure. Masood, I want to welcome you this morning, and I want to also appreciate your joining us this morning. For those who are not aware, Masood is actually in Pakistan, and he and his family have been directly impacted by the floods and the aftermath of those floods. So we are so grateful that you're here this morning. So if you can tell us a little bit about your collaborations with the QES program and what you worked on and what the outcomes were in just a couple of minutes, we would love to hear that. Thank you.
Mike?
I'm still not hearing you, Masood. No. Is it your earphones not working, maybe? Your headphones?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry for the technical difficulties. We are into a lot of difficulties these days in Pakistan. You know, everybody is overwhelmed with a lot of issues and problems. Well, I'm founder of Clifton Urban Forest, which is an effort for ecosystem restoration in Karachi. And we have right now 600,000 trees, 500,000 are just mangroves. And we have created a lagoon, and we have created a model of ecosystem restoration here in Karachi, which is replicable in all large cities of the world, number one. Number two, before this role, in a different role where I was working and heading the UNDP GF Small Grants program, one of your students came to for a research there, and we collaborated with Roy. I even met Roy while I was there in Canada, and we even discussed something about Roy's Egypt project, and I was quite keen to have some help of him to replicate that in Pakistan. You know, one thing about Pakistan is very important before I end my talk, is that we are the worst affected, one of the worst affected, top worst affected countries of the climate change. We experience drought one day, and the next day we have flood. And at this moment, 1/3 of Pakistan's landmass is underwater. So among other things, the activism that I have started now is urban forest and urban wetlands, because we believe that urban wetlands are very, very important, not only in Pakistan, but everywhere in the world, because the greed of real estate has actually turned the paradigm of how our cities should be. But the pressure of the climate change is now, highlighting the fact that we should bring this at the policy level, that the rainwater harvesting should be the essential responsibility of the municipal authorities, and it should be their mandatory role to make sure that there are enough urban wetlands to absorb that water. And another thing which I have seen here, I've been monitoring with for my own research purpose, that there was unusual rain in Kandhar region. Now you know that in Kandhar, Job, and all of these places are deserts, and there is this famous desert called Dashte Margo, the desert of death. So that unusual rain in a place like Kandhar, and then Zhangzi River in China is witnessing its worst drought after 1868. So I call it a precipitation shift. So the precipitation shift is happening almost everywhere, and it has to be scientifically further researched. Of course we worked, and it was the good thing about that student Saiza was that she agreed with me to go out of the convention and to go to the farthest parts of the country. We even went to a village which was the last village of Pakistan in the south, and she interviewed those communities who probably have never seen a person coming and interviewing them. So I think it was a wonderful experience, and it was one of its first kind of a PhD on climate smart agriculture, even before the climate smart agriculture policy was formulated. So I think that Roy, it was really, and I also myself learned a lot, and I've been advocating. And then your work actually influenced one project of Food and Agriculture Organization, which I also facilitated them. It is purely on climate smart agriculture. Over to you.
Wonderful, wonderful. And you know what I'm hearing is the impact that these students have had in actually bringing research to NGOs and other organizations, and being able to underscore the importance of that kind of evidence-informed advocacy. Lena, I'm going to come to you now as changing hats instead of being a moderator, as a community or as a research partner, research placement partner within the QES program. What was your experience? What did you work on? And what are your thoughts about the networks and collaborations that you had?
Thank you so much, Susan, for the introduction. For those of you that aren't aware, my name is Lena Tang. I work at UNU Inwe, which stands for, it's a mouthful, United Nations University Institute for Water, Environment, and Health. We are the UN's only think tank on water, based in the lovely city of Hamilton in Ontario. Susan is one of our amazing adjunct professors, so I really thank you, Susan, for including me here today. I think what I want to stress is that when it comes to collaborating with QES, as Susan said, UNU Inwe was a research placement partner for one particular QES postdoc, Eunice Salubi, I should say Dr. Eunice Salubi. And it was a great experience. I think what was wonderful here was that we were able to find something of mutual interest, synergy between the QES program and UNU Inwe, which was that we had the mutual objective of building the research capacity of what we hope are future leaders in, for us specifically in the water sector, with its impact with environment and health. What was great here in this regard is that we did have someone, whether it's at the PhD or that postdoc level, is that they have the basic foundation of research skills that are ready to be deployed, but we have the fun task then of helping to mentor and build upon those skills, grow them. So I think when you think about it from a research partner perspective, there's that added advantage, like what Diana was saying. It is a two-way street where the QES scholar in this regard is growing their capacity to be very impactful researchers in the future. But from us as a research placement partner, we get the added capacity of a trained researcher. That's great.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lena. Anne, can I ask you to introduce yourself and what your connection to the QES program is.
Hi, good morning. I'm based in Ottawa in Canada, and I originally trained in the UK in the field of development economics. But when I came to Canada, I started work at the North South Institute, where I focused specifically on development policy research. It's a think tank based in Canada. And then about 12 years ago, I moved to the International Development Research Centre, which is a Canadian organization that supports capacity strengthening and research, particularly by scholars based in the Global South on issues of importance to them and their countries as captured, for example, by the Sustainable Development Goals. So I think you heard from my colleague, Katie Bryant, on Monday about some of the work that we're doing in our division at IDRC, which is called Education and Science, and specifically the 3 Sustainable Development Goals that we focus on. SDG 4, which is about quality education, SDG 5, which is about gender equality, and SDG 9, which is about industry, innovation, and infrastructure. So at IDRC, we have a very strong focus on capacity strengthening and on research. And so in my capacity at IDRC, I've been responsible for a number of fellowships and awards, including, for example, some programming in South Asia, which is around the water area, particularly with engineers, in a program called Sachi Waters, which focuses very specifically on integrating notions of gender equality into the training that engineers get when they're looking at the issues people face in accessing water. So in terms of the Queen Elizabeth scholarships, I think what particularly interested us in the Queen Elizabeth scholarships was the opportunity to take what was, as Susan has just explained, a really impressive program that started in 2014, and taking it to a new level in terms of a scholarship that was being supported. So as Susan mentioned, there were already a number of PhDs that were being supported, but what we did was to work with Universities Canada, Community Foundations of Canada, and the Rideau Hall Foundation to explain the importance of actually also including postdocs and early career scientists in the Queen Elizabeth Scholarship Program under this title of the Queen Elizabeth Advanced Scholarships. And the other dimension I think that we brought to the program was to extend the coverage from the Commonwealth to all low and middle income countries, and really to emphasize the opportunity for Global South scholars to come to Canada to work with Canadians, but also very much to work amongst themselves. So this is a program that for us has been important in building that South-South community as much as the South-North body of scholars relative to what was happening previously. And I think the third element is the emphasis on gender equality and inclusivity. And as I say, this program has been very important for strengthening not just individual capacity, but institutional capacity. And I think some of the speakers have just underscored the opportunities that they've had as community placement organizations, as much as academic organizations, in terms of the strengthening of the organizations that they're working at, that were created by the Queen Elizabeth Scholarship, and particularly the Advanced Scholarship Program. So I think, yeah, the community engagement has been a really important part of our work at IDRC. And I think this is also evidenced in the design and the implementation of the Queen Elizabeth Scholarship Program. The research placement partnerships are really very important, and that was an element that was brought also by the Community Foundations of Canada, the way in which they work with universities and communities across Canada. And the concept of mobility, really supporting people to be able to come to move between countries in the Global South, and also to come to Canada. And of course, as we know, that was really problematic with COVID in the last couple of years. And I think despite that, I think it's been really impressive what's been able to be achieved. I think the notion of interdisciplinarity and applied research in IDRC's case, I think it's not only in our division of education and science, but it's also very much evident in the work that we do around climate, resilient food systems, global health, sustainable and inclusive economics, and democratic and inclusive governance, which are the other programs at IDRC. So I think in terms of the results, it's really been clear that at the individual and at the institutional level, that the Queen Elizabeth Scholarships and the Queen Elizabeth Advanced Scholarships has really had a lot of strong results. As you mentioned, each of you so far, there have been amazing areas of applied research that have been completed on issues related to the SDGs. There have been a lot of exchanges of research techniques. How do you go about engaging with communities in research? What sort of research tools are developed? I think a lot of these initial results that have occurred at an individual level are also very transparent at an institutional level, where several institutions, both academic and community, are using some of the research and the techniques as case studies, for example, in curricula to enhance their teaching and research practices. There's been tremendous growth of collaboration between scholars and between institutions that didn't exist there before. I mean, I was very struck by the number of organizations, the community placement partners. I think it's about 3/4 of the community placement partners under the Queen Elizabeth Advanced Scholarships that were first-time collaborations with Canadian universities, and equally amongst the more academic institutions, about half of those were new to the Canadian university system. So I think it's been a tremendous opportunity for building up both existing, but also the potential for new collaborations. And I guess that's what we're thinking about now in this session. So thanks.
Thank you so much. And that was really, really useful. One of the things I know in my experience in the QAS, having been involved as a faculty member from the beginning, is about, establishing those collaborations and those partnerships, the community placement partners, the research placement partners, and oftentimes we would go to people who we already had a relationship with, but then some of those relationships were new and or were built during that period. So I want to come back to you, Diana, because as you know, Diana and I have had a long-standing research relationship. And so when I had QES funding, of course, I bring her on as a collaborator. But through that process, over that period of time, those collaborations, those networks have grown. And now you have new collaborators who were actually QES scholars now, faculty members in their own right and so on. So can you just reflect for about 5 minutes or so, Diana, on the collaborations and the networks and how they were established and then how they grew, and what would you do to try and grow or sustain them?
Thank you very much, Susan. So in terms of collaboration, what I would say is there are different levels of collaboration. Like you mentioned, you and I have had long-standing collaborations on different kind of works. And that was like, I know you, you know me, and we can establish that. But there's the and I working for Kenya Medical Research Institute when our collaboration was going on, we established that and we strengthened that. But again, as I moved to the community health support program, that collaboration that we established within a different organization also helps the new area in which I have moved into, which is a kind of a different institution, but it benefits so greatly for the collaboration that we established previously within the QES program. So like I said, there are different levels of collaboration. There's the institution to institution collaboration that we established. And then, like you mentioned a little bit, there's the collaboration that we established with the scholars. So the scholars come, we don't have a previous collaboration with them, but by working with us, we establish a new collaboration, and then it's strengthened for both of us, because for them, working with us, embedding in our communities, now they have a new area, a new site. As they move on, like you said, there were scholars, now they're professors, they're lecturers, they're different kind of things they're doing. But they know that that relationship they established with us, they can count on it. If they need somewhere to do their research, if they need other collaborators, that's another level that was established during the QES program. So apart from the institution and the scholar collaboration that is established, there's also the community collaboration, which is also strengthened. So they come to us, we have relationships with community, but just by the fact that they're there, you know, and they go and they embed in this community, that strengthens it. And I cannot underestimate the value of, because now we have scholars from all over the world. They're not necessarily Kenyans. So there's the cultural aspect of that collaboration that is established, and that is invaluable in the communities where we work. And it greatly, you know, strengthens our relation with the community and the relationship they set for us. And then, so there's that community relationship that is strengthened. And then by the fact that they just come in with their research programs, there's also the government, and for us, the counties relationship that we have. And when the students come in with their research, they have to be linked to these government agencies, government bodies, as we are seeking, as they seek for permits, and as they do their interviews sometimes with policymakers. And that strengthens also our relationships with the counties and the government institutions and agencies. So that's really a strong relationship that is established. So this whole range of, you know, collaborations that is either established or strengthened actually strengthens all the institutions and all the individuals that are part of it. I think that's what I can say.
That's really, really useful, because and I'm really appreciative of Roy giving us this opportunity to reflect on these things, because those are things I wouldn't have thought about. I do know, and I teach about this, that, you know, relationships, collaborations are based on trust. And, you know, you and I had a long relationship of trust, and we had built up social capital. And so when I bring graduate students to you to say, okay, can they work on this project in your community? I'm very particular about the students that I send to you, because they know they can't mess up. They can't break this relationship of trust, because once you build that relationship of trust, if you break it, it's easy to break. It's hard to build, but really easy to break. It didn't occur to me that they were also helping to strengthen the relationships that you have in the community as well. And this network just continues to grow, because, as we said, you know, some of the students who've worked with you are now at universities in Canada and the US and so on. So it's a tremendous network that you now have. Masood, I want to ask you to reflect on this now, because I don't know the history of the relationship that you had with Roy, but did he know you before he came to you to ask you to partner with him? Was this a brand new relationship? Did you have to figure out who he was, and should you trust him?
Yeah.
Perfect.
I knew about the Waterloo Institute of Water, but I didn't knew Roy himself. But because the student who came to do this PhD did the master's also with us, with our program, she introduced me with Roy. And then when later on I came to Canada for some other research work, I had an opportunity to meet him. Yeah.
Yeah, and so tell us about that collaboration. What worked for you? How would you try to hang on to that collaboration, hang on to that network, and expand that network?
You know, Pakistan is the 5th largest nation in the world. Because of terrorism and because of several other security reasons, many foreign students do not come here for research. So there is a lot of room for research here, and also in Afghanistan. So when she came, and because I worked in a very unconventional way, and I have my own way of working, I convinced her to go to the extreme grassroots. And that's why I think she had also a very good insight into the real problem. Now at this stage, what I understand, there is what I call water climate change nexus. On that, if you have to do research, you have to send people to Afghanistan, to Pakistan, to different places. You know what is happening, that right now there are glaciers melting and there are artificial lakes happening in the north. And then the beds of the Swat River is doubled. The whole bed is doubled. And then there are places which are inundated, which never have been inundated in history. And then on the other side of Himalayas, as I told you, there is a drought in the China and Zhangzi and all that. And then there is a drought in Europe. Something fundamentally is going on. And there is a lot of scientific and geopolitical and all other these things have to be studied and researched, which is not happening. So what I'm saying is, and we are doing activism here also, to have urban wetlands. Without urban wetlands, we will never have a solution to retain this water, which is very precious and which is very useful, but which is right now is a misery for all half of my country.
And so Masood, what I'm hearing you say, I think, is that you would like more students to come. Like you would like to have more collaborations and networks and have more students come and work with you. Is that right?
There has been a research deficit for last 20
okay.
in a country like Pakistan and a country like Afghanistan. And these places are most affected by this climate water nexus. And so I think there is a focus efforts needed to do a lot of research on different perspectives to understand. And even from the gender perspective, because you see, when there is a drought, women, I personally, and Sajda has seen those places where women go 10 kilometers to bring water on their back.
Yeah.
So this is right. Yeah.
So what do you think organizations like yours could do to encourage more students to come? Because as you say, there's this perception of the geopolitical issues, the security issues. How can organizations like your own encourage more students to come?
Things have changed in Pakistan and also improved in Afghanistan. I know there are a few isolated places where you could have problem, but frankly, these places are quite fit. And then, in some cases, you can send in some Afghani, scholar to Afghanistan. There's no need to bring an expatriate. You can send a person like Sajda, some Pakistani student to come, because there is they understand the culture, and then security-wise, it's easy. But there's no need to send an expatriate. You can even send Pakistanis and Afghanis to those places, and even part of Iran, Wakhan corridor, and then the Tajikistan side of Afghanistan, and and the whole Afghanistan, the desert region of Afghanistan, and the whole Pakistan. There is one effort now going on at the national level. It's called Living Indus, and even the UN is also participating. A lot of work is going on. It's called Living Indus. Even Roy, if Roy wants, I can introduce him to them also.
Wonderful. So that's really useful and interesting to hear. What the first water research project I ever worked on in the early 1990s was actually in Uzbekistan around the Aral Sea. And then things got a bit dicey around there and we had to stop doing our research. And it's very disappointing when that happens. I'm going to come to you, Lena, and ask you the same question about, UNU Inway. I already have a link there and we've already built networks with the QES. How can we sustain those networks? How can we extend those networks and those collaborations in your view?
Apologies. Thanks, Susan. On sustaining and extending, I'm going to reflect on our experience of working together on the QES Scholars Program, as well as some of the experiences of the panelists that just spoke for the previous Gender Equality and Girls Empowerment session. So one thing that I really want to emphasize before talking about sustaining and extending was how much these QES scholars highlighted repeatedly the importance of their local as well as international networks and collaborations in terms of, especially at that local level, in terms of adapting methods when they are faced with disruptions that were beyond their control. So specifically here, it was nationwide flooding, like in Pakistan, as Masood has noted, as well as COVID-19 pandemic. Additionally, how these different networks also helped them cultivate sensitivity when conducting research with vulnerable groups. And what does that say to me in terms of the importance of your local networks and collaborators is that the QES program has really helped these researchers address conducting work in context-specific limitations and constraints. So it really reminds me of that saying, no one is an island, right? Because you really come to appreciate how the QES network has provided these scholars with a social safety net in this regard. When we're talking about sustaining and extending, I think it goes back to what Diana and yourself and Masood have noted, is that we just need to continue cultivating this trust and this communication with each other, build upon this network. We have a tendency as researchers to think that, okay, right, when a project is wrapped up, I write my final report, it's done and dusted, and then it's on to the next proposal, it's on to the next problem. But as Sajida from the previous session, Masood's student had noted, it's like, no, we have a responsibility too now to build upon this, especially for when you're working with various vulnerable groups. We've already built some of the insightful comments into what we hope would be changes in policy and practice. It's time to go back and see whether or not those changes have actually translated into action, translated into change. And hopefully with the QES network, we would be able to help sustain and extend upon this, whether or not with new research and new projects to see if, well, we are actually realizing the SDG agenda.
That's wonderful. And I really want to come to you because as a funder, you were one of the ones who made this happen. And now we have this amazing global network of 3,000 Queen Elizabeth scholars who have received capacity building and training through this program. I just want to share a quick little story. One of my first PhD students who came to me from Barbados is now the director of climate change for the government of the Northwest Territories. And she would never have been able to do a PhD if it had not been for Queen Elizabeth Scholars funding. And now here's this person from Barbados living in Whitehorse. And she's going to be very cold this winter, but she's going to have a huge impact on what's happening in climate change in Canada as a result of this. So we've got this great network of scholars, this amazing network of community partners and research placement partners. What's the plan to sustain and build that network?
Well, I think to say that there's a plan maybe to overstate the case, but I think the idea at IGRC is that, yes, networks and collaborations are really critical. It's not just a case of amplification of research and evidence and working together to make sure that that is understood and taken up by communities, by the public and the private sector, but really thinking about the future of those scholars that have come together from across sectors, obviously not just from the university sector, to work together. That's really been an important part of IGRC's evolution. As I was saying before, I think that there's been a lot of emphasis on supporting individuals, and that's clearly really important. But individuals can only do so much, and the institutions within which they're embedded need also to change and adapt the way in which they're addressing problems, and not only within countries, but between countries. And I think very much our thinking at IDRC is that it's important to support groups of people to work together across countries and across the North and the South. And that's why a lot of the calls for proposals that IGRC has these days really emphasize the need for applications to be from consortia of universities, teams of people working from the university, the community sector, and also engaging with the private sector. So increasingly you'll see that. And I think that's where the Queen Elizabeth Scholars Network comes into its own. As you've all explained, there's been tremendous growth of experience, of trust that's been built up at multiple levels, and new generations of students that then graduate, become doctoral postdocs and then early career scientists and come into positions of authority and decision making in the institutions are now able to work together. So we've been running calls which call for this type of network, and I think you've already seen in a number of instances, and I shouldn't just talk about IDRC, but IDRC went on after the Queen Elizabeth Scholarship Advanced Scholars Programme. We went on to particularly focus on West Africa and trying to build connections between Canadian universities and West African research institutions with the Queen Elizabeth Advanced Scholarship, the West African model. And I think you'll see that in that cohort of projects and teams that are working in West Africa, there's actually a large number that were originally involved in the Queen Elizabeth Scholars Advanced Scholarship Programme, and even in the Queen Elizabeth Scholarship Programme. So I think there is evidence of other funding being sought for. And it's not just from IDRC. And I've been struck recently reading about some of the networks that have emerged from the QES that are now being funded with the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council funding. And of course, they were involved in Queen Elizabeth Scholarship, the Advanced Scholars Programme earlier. I also wanted to say that what we're doing at the moment, particularly in Sub-Saharan Africa, is we're working with the national research funding organizations, the science granting councils, we call them. So we have a network of 15 countries, 15 science granting councils or their equivalents that we're working with to strengthen their capacity to think about how they fund research within their countries, but not just within their countries. And that's where I think the point has been made, how important it is for researchers to work with the community sector and also with the public sector and with the private sector. So we've been supporting councils to think about how they do that nationally, but also to work very much regionally and across regions within Africa. So in the past, it's been that common that national funding agencies have actually had the flexibility to collaborate with councils in other countries. And now they've been, with our support, they've been putting in place collaborative agreements. So you might think that sounds highly bureaucratic, but often formal agreements are actually necessary before agencies can use money in a way that would support that type of collaboration. But I think in parallel with this collaboration that's happening through the QES at a regional level, let's say within Africa, we've been working with these councils to also develop the frameworks. And so the idea is that these councils are now experiencing the benefits of having regional research networks that they're supporting that are tackling issues like access to water, which after all are not just confined to within one country's borders, but you really have to tackle these questions at a regional level as much as at a global level. And so I think we're really seeing the value of networking being recognized and facilitated increasingly by these national science granting councils. So I think these are just some ways that I think there's potential for QES scholars, whether it's with Canadians or whether it's just amongst scholars based in the global south to work more together. I just wanted to mention a couple of other things, because I think what Masood was saying about Afghanistan was so important, and Pakistan. I mean, we've been working with the University of Central Asia to try and support the training of opportunities for people from within Afghanistan, and also particularly women, to gain that experience of doing research and then thinking about how that can be used to inform public policy on a broad range of areas, but particularly also in the climate area. And just thinking a bit outside the box, within Africa, we've been working with a network of centres that have been focused very much on maths. And you would say, well, what's that got to do with water? But actually, because there is such a lot of data that's needed to think about issues of access to water and other climate challenged areas, we've found that this program that we've supported, which is called Mathematics for Climate Science, that's been very important in developing tools for mathematicians to actually think of it and get engaged in the climate area, so they can work alongside people who are more traditional climate scientists, but in the use of data and thinking about these problems. So that's another type of network that exists.
That's great. I would also just throw in there that if there's any possibility of connecting with the University of Waterloo, because we're one of the top mathematics universities in the world, and we actually have a mathematics professor who runs something in Africa. He's done TED Talks about his goal is that the next Einstein will come from Africa.
That's actually the network we're working with. Actually,
oh,
the African
that's
Institute
perfect. So
for
Neil
Mathematical
Turek,
Sciences.
yeah,
Exactly.
Neil Turek,
Yes, it's his organization that we work with.
Perfect. Yeah, he's an amazing human being. We have 5 minutes left. I want to go very quickly just through our speakers and say, if all of a sudden a miracle happened and Queen Elizabeth Scholars said, okay, we have another $100 million, what's the one piece of advice you would give them about how to run that program? And I'm going to go in the same order with Diana, then Masood, then Lena, then and you can claim conflict of interest if you want to, but let's start with Diana.
Thank you very much, Susan. Okay, one of the areas that, I think, when this, like I mentioned earlier, when the students come, there's always this engagement in terms of interviewing policymakers. It would be so nice to actually have a strong component of policymakers in the programs, because sometimes they come up with really good outcomes in their research, but there's that lack of link with the policymakers, and I think that's one thing I would really love to see strengthened within the program.
Wonderful, that's very useful. Lena, or sorry, Masood.
What I say is, when the climate is changed, and we know that the climate is changed, and climate change is a reality, but why the academic paradigm is not changed? I think you need to bring innovation in your research and research allocation methodologies and methods and things, because you see the problem is at this moment we are witnessing unusual, unprecedented events in the history. So I think the academic institutions and the research institutions like Waterloo or like QES or like, you have to change the paradigm of your approaches, because I think the paradigm is still the same, and the world at the grassroots is changed. So there is a deficit of, there is a big gap and deficit of, places, research at the places where for last 20 years, quality research is not done. And the local institutions are very strong. They are not resourceful. They are not, they do not have, the global experience and all of these things. But, there are institutions like mine, like institution of UN, United Nations, all of these, even the government itself is quite overwhelmed at this moment. They are planning to bring reforms in their irrigation system. They're planning to bring reforms in their approaches to disaster mitigation, disaster risk reduction. So I think you guys have to redesign your paradigm in allocating your resources for research.
Thank you. Lena?
Thank you. Actually, to build on both what Diana and Masood have said, when you're talking about translating that policy into action, looking at if we could build upon the research outcomes that students already have by potentially building a secondary like postdoc or post-postdoc opportunity, but working specifically with those local communities, right? We want to build upon their previous projects and start building that capacity, like Masood said, at your local organizations. I think there's so much scope for that impactful research outcome that we would hope for. Not just then, again, with your individuals and your institutions, but then you're having that secondary and tertiary impact, so that snowball effect on new local researchers, ideally.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Lena. And do you want to jump in 1 minute?
Well, yeah, I just have one thing to say. I would say make sure that the national science granting councils are involved in any new initiative, because they really are the ones that are going to help to sustain research capacity in the long run in countries, and to make those connections to public policy making, as well as if they get involved in understanding how QES works, then they will also value the engagement with communities which they are already doing in many respects, but even to strengthen that. Thank you.
Great. So I think the take-home message that maybe I'll just sum up is impact, that there's a lot of great stuff out there, but it needs to be translated into impact. And how can we train that generation of QES scholars into that, what I would call knowledge translation or integrated knowledge translation. So thank you so much to all of our panelists. I have to say this has been a life-changing week for me. I've learned so much, and if you all knew how many emails I've been sending off to the side to all the people that I've seen today and in previous days, this network is growing even out of this own event. So thank you so much. And Roy, I'll turn it back over to you to close us off.
Susan. Yeah, it's with sadness that we have to say goodbye. There is an intensive chat going on during the panel session. So thank you, Susan, for moderating the last panel session. Thank you, Anne, Diana, Masood, and Lena for being with us in this last panel session and sharing your insights with us. So as said, we unfortunately have come to the end of our 3-day event. I want to thank all the keynote speakers, moderators, panelists today and over the past 2 days once again for sharing their experiences and insights with us. And also, I just want to shout out what an amazing group of QES scholars and partners we've had the privilege of working with. It's been a really amazing 3 days. I learned so much. We heard stories of success. We also heard about challenges, not least, of course, as a result of the current pandemic and how the pandemic has affected progress against the Sustainable Development Goals. And it has never been so evident, I guess, how important it is to have clean and safe water, or to have access to clean and safe water and sanitation for all, with the emphasis on all, to control the current pandemic. It's also very important, in my view, to keep our finger on the pulse, to see how we're progressing against the various Sustainable Development Goals. And what I also hope is that the 3-day session clarified how interlinked and how connected the various Sustainable Development Goals are. So I'm referring to SDG 6 here, but we had stories that related to many more SDGs that are clearly connected. So I also hope, as some of the panelists mentioned, that we keep this network of QES scholars alive. We would love to create a network of alumni to stay in touch, continue following the stories that we've heard over the past few days. And we'll give this more thought together with my colleagues here in the Water Institute at the University of Waterloo and at UNU INVE at McMaster, and together with you, of course, and our partner institutions around the world. Let's make this a lasting collective action to keep each other informed, consult each other where and when needed, and keep on looking for opportunities to continue our collaborations. And Masood, thanks so much also for the chat messages just now. This has been a massive co-production with keynote speakers, moderators, panelists, partner organizations that would have never seen the light without these moderators, keynotes, panelists, and partner organizations, but also it would also not have happened without the time, energy, and dedication, I have to say, of my colleague Susan Elliott, who just moderated the last panel session, Greg Janes, who closed this the session on Monday, and Sarah Dixon Anderson, who you met yesterday. I also want to take the opportunity here to recognize and commemorate Susan Watt from McMaster University, who unfortunately passed away earlier this year. We started the QES journey in the project Water as a Foundation for Healthy Communities and Sustainable Livelihoods in 2017 with her, and she's dearly missed. Last but not least, I want to thank my Water Institute colleagues behind the screens. You hardly saw them, you didn't see them. Kevin Beamer and Julie Grant. Kevin is the Managing Director of the Water Institute, and he has been supporting the QES project since day one. And Julie is our amazing communications officer in the Water Institute, without whom we would not have been able to put the online program together. Julie is really the silent force behind the entire online production over the past days. And I want to thank Julie and Kevin for all their help and support. Also a very important word of thanks to my former Water Institute colleague, our administrator, Marianne Hardy, who unfortunately left a few months ago, but those of you in the QES program, you will remember her name. She was the one taking care of the QES related travel and finances. So this is the end of the conference. Thank you all who participated online during these 3 days. I hope we managed to deliver an informative program, giving you a bird's eye view, so to say, of all the hard work that has been going into the research, the collaborations, the institutional support to improve water and sanitation for the benefit of those that really need it most. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for being with us these 3 days. And hopefully we get the opportunity to keep the network alive, as I said. And hopefully we meet again soon, in person or virtual, in the near future. Until then, take care. Thanks a lot. And with this, I would like to close the conference. Thank you all.
Thank you.